Since mankind could travel, there have been different types of boats that have been used to get from point A to point B. Some boats are meant for combat, let's say like a warship, and some boats are used for more recreational purposes like fishing or maybe just a day out on the water. In today's episode of Know Before You Go, we're going to discuss everything you might need to know before you use the Washington State Ferries. If that's going to be something you think you might like, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button down below. I'll greatly appreciate it. The Washington State Ferries is known as a local staple in Washington State, otherwise known as the WSF for short, is actually known as a vital component to harbor transportation from point A to point B for the Washingtonians as well as the tourists with them. The Washington State Ferries actually didn't exist since the very beginning of the ferry lifetime. Actually started in about the 1930s timeframe. At that time, it wasn't actually recognized and called the Washington State Ferries. They were actually called the mosquito fleets. So this mosquito fleet was actually a privatized small fleet of steamer vessels that doesn't have any correlation to the actual bugs. Back in the 1930s, the mosquito fleet was actually used for foot passengers or walk-on passengers that took passengers from point A to point B, mainly and almost exclusively in the Puget Sound in Washington State. They were actually pretty small vessels, and it only allowed for about 50 or so passengers on these small boats, and that was mainly going to be used in the more local areas of the Puget Sound. So as the mosquito fleet continued to gain traction with its services across the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, the state of Washington, the Department of Transportation, actually gained interest in this said mosquito fleet. So if you skip forward about 20 years to the 1950s, the Department of Transportation for Washington State, or WSDOT, actually purchased this mosquito fleet, giving to what we know now as the Washington State Ferry System. Some fun facts about the Washington State Ferry System is the fact that it is the largest ferry fleet in the continental United States. It harbors about 20 vessels that frequent across the Puget Sound as well as the upper Salish Seas. Before we actually get deeper into what the Washington State Ferry System is and what they do and why it's important to you, it is important to know that the Washington State Ferry Systems are not the only ferries that are going to be seen and or utilized in the Puget Sound. You may actually see Kitsap Transit, foot ferries, and or fast ferries across the Puget Sound depending on where you're going and also what route you're taking. While you're watching this video, you may actually ask yourself, why? Why do I need to use the Washington Ferries? And that's because it provides an alternate route of transportation to get across the Puget Sound and also to get from the lower Puget Sound over to the upper Puget Sound. There are also international ferries such as the Blackball Fleet, which takes passengers from Port Angeles, Washington over to British Columbia, Canada. So by definition, a ferry boat is actually going to bring passengers or cargo or miscellaneous things from point A to point B over a body of water. And so that leads us to our next major discussion, and that's going to be, what body of water are these ferries using? So the Puget Sound is actually a body of water that essentially connects to the Pacific Ocean on the far side of the western side of Washington State. So first, let's discuss the Puget Sound. I didn't actually know what Puget Sound was. I was never actually a geography person when I was in school, so I didn't know what a sound of water was, and I definitely didn't know what a Puget Sound was. I actually pronounced it incorrectly. I pronounced it
Puget Sound.
Don't judge me. But anyways, the Puget Sound is actually a body of water that connects the Seattle and Bremerton area of Washington State over to the Pacific Ocean and other places like the Salish Sea. The Puget Sound is also approximately 95 miles in length, so that's from north to south or top to bottom, and then also 1 to 5 miles in width, that's from east to west or left to right. The Puget Sound also serves as a massive estuary for the wildlife and marine life here in Washington State. So now that we know a little bit of history on the Puget Sound, as well as a little bit of history on the Washington State Ferries, or AKA the mosquito fleets, let's go ahead and discuss some of the major details that you're going to need to know in order to effectively use these ferries. Starting off with number 1. That's going to be the Washington State Department of Transportation app and or websites. The website and the app is going to give you information for these ferries, including prices, locations, terminal availability, drive-on availability, also reservations. So if you have any questions about what should I know, how much is it going to cost, where am I going to be going for these ferries and or the terminals, feel free to navigate to the app and or the website, which I posted below for you to go ahead and download or find on your internet browser. One of the major reasons why I highly recommend that you use the WSDOT app is because you're going to be able to see things like the routes and the availability. If there are any delays and or cancellations, you're going to be able to see the pricing for you, your vehicle, maybe the party that you're traveling with, and then you're also going to be able to see real-time information of where your ferry vessel is and when is it expected to get there. I actually call the Washington State Department of Transportation the Washington Ferry app, because even though you're able to see other information on the app or the website, I only and almost exclusively use that app for the ferries. So when you're looking at the app and you're trying to identify what's the best area to get onto a ferry and go over to Seattle, or maybe you're in Seattle, what's the best terminal to go over to Bremerton or wherever it is that you're going, I highly recommend you just navigate to Google and type in ferry terminal near me. From there, you're going to be able to see all of the ferry locations relative to your location for your GPS, and then I highly recommend that you just kind of make your way there. Before you do that, make sure that you know the ferry schedules. So 2 major concepts that you want to think about before you actually use this Washington State Ferry is going to be, what schedule or what route am I going to attend? Because some of these routes are only going to lead to certain locations. And then some of these routes are also going to be tied down to a time frame. There isn't just going to be a ferry waiting for you to board. They're actually going to be transporting passengers from point A to point B, or terminal to terminal inside of the Puget Sound. So make sure that you know, 1, again, what route do you want to choose? And then 2, what's the scheduling for that? Third thing that you want to consider, this is a more optional section depending on what ferry terminal you're using, is going to be, is there availability? Some of the ferry terminals and the ferry boats do require you to have a ferry reservation. So if you know what ferry terminal that you're going to be departing from and then arriving from, again, you want to make sure you know the schedules, the routes, and availability. So if you are going to be using these ferries, one of the biggest things that you always want to keep in mind, and this is my number 1 rule, is to be on time. My dad always says to me that if you're early, you're on time, and if you're on time, then you're late. That's just a really good rule to live your life when it comes to trying to use these Washington State ferries, because again, they are not going to wait for you. Keep in mind that these ferries have to stay on a timetable. They have to go on their route on a specific schedule. And again, there may be delays and cancellations, but for the most part, these ferries and their staff are going to leave you behind at your ferry terminal if you just don't get there on time. Now, let's say that you actually got to the ferry, it's either gone because you missed it because you were late, or maybe it was full because it was a rush hour situation. It's not all doom and gloom from that situation. You simply have to wait for the next ferry or the ferry to come back from its other location, And then once the ferry comes back, you simply just hop onto the ferry and go about your day. If you don't want to wait for the ferry to come back, you could simply just drive back to the western side of the Puget Sound. There are about 10 routes across the majority of the Puget Sound. That's going to be from Bremerton to Seattle or Bainbridge Island to Seattle. Here on the Washington State Department of Transportation website, you're actually going to see the table of contents section on the left-hand side, and that's going to show you different genres of information. So you have car information, ferry information, and some plane information. For this video, we're going to be exploring the ferry category, and when you select that ferry tile or icon on the left-hand side, you're then going to be able to see the schedules and routes under certain drop-downs, and then you're going to be able to select the specific route and or schedule that's going to be best suited for you. Within the website, you're also going to be able to see the pricing. You can actually go into the WSDOT app or the website, and you can go ahead and pre-purchase some of the tickets that you may need in order to use that ferry. Do keep in mind that not every ferry voyage is going to require you to have a ticket. We're going to talk about that here shortly. Within this website and or app, you're also going to see other important information. So if you have any questions, again, I highly recommend that you go over to the website or the app, and it's going to provide you pretty much with all the information you need. So here is the Washington State Department of Transportation app. You can see that the screen here is a little bit more small screen friendly for those mobile phones and or tablets that are going to be using this app, and you can actually see information here much more streamlined. In my personal opinion, I would actually use the WSDOT app versus the website, mainly because it gets me the information right then and there when I need it. Do you know that the website as well as the app do need an internet connection for you to use? So if you're using your iPhone or Samsung and you have 2G, 3G, or no service, it's not going to work. So save yourself some frustration and make sure your device, your iPhone or whatever it is connected to Wi-Fi, or maybe you are in a place that has really good cellular reception. Now that we've discussed the website as well as the app, we have to identify the ferry terminal that you're going to be going to. So not all ferry terminals are going to be built equally. And I say that in a funny manner, but it's actually the truth. So let's say you're going to be going to the Seattle ferry terminal, and that place looks like a miniature airport terminal, but instead of getting on a plane, you're actually going to be getting on a ferry. There is no ferry that connects Seattle to Tacoma, Washington. Even though Seattle and Tacoma, Washington are two major cities inside of the state of Washington, the logistics for taking or using a ferry from Tacoma to Seattle and vice versa just doesn't make sense for the Washington State Ferry staff. So that way, you're typically just going to have to drive from Tacoma to Seattle or Seattle to Tacoma. Depending on the terminal that you're going to be going to, you're going to find that there are basic accommodations there. You are at the very least going to be able to have a restroom, some vending machines, a place to sit, as well as a place to charge up your devices. So let's say you're hungry, you're exhausted because you used your e-bike or your scooter to get to the ferry terminal, and now you just want to kind of chill out and relax. If you are at the ferry terminal a little bit before your ferry actually arrives, it's a great place for you to kind of just take a break and regain your composure. Depending on the day and the situation and the time, you are actually going to be able to find that these ferry terminals can be either really busy or really empty. So on those empty days when you are at a ferry terminal, you are actually going to pretty much have a ferry terminal and or a ferry that is for you and a handful of folks. However, on a day when there is a rush hour for, let's say, commuting from the weekday, or maybe there's a Seahawks or a Mariners game, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to have a pretty packed ferry, both for car riders and walk-on passengers. When it comes to buying your ticket, as I mentioned earlier, you are able to use the website or the app in order to buy your ticket for boarding these Washington State ferries. There are other ways to purchase a ferry ticket. You don't necessarily have to use a website or the app. You can actually go to the ferry terminal. You can go ahead and go to a kiosk and get the ticket that way, or you could also go to a ticket booth depending on which ferry terminal that you're going to. All of the prices, regardless if you're using the website, the app, or a ticketing booth or a kiosk, they're all going to be the same. So don't worry about trying to find the best deal. If you are going to be commuting from, let's say, Bremerton to Seattle for work on a daily basis, there is a more economical ferry ticket that you can buy. Essentially, you're going to buy a ferry ticket and then load it up for X amount of trips. And that's going to give you a little bit more of a bundle deal or bundle pricing for when you are going from Seattle to Bremerton. So now we found the ferry terminal that we want to go to based on where we are currently. We know what ferry route we're going to be using, and then we know when the ferry is going to be leaving the terminal and then arriving at the next terminal. So let's say you made it to the ferry terminal. You're going to be deciding, are you going to be a walk-on passenger or a drive-on passenger? A walk-on passenger, for all intents and purposes, is a passenger that literally walks onto the ferry. A drive-on passenger, again, for all intents and purposes, is going to be exactly what it sounds like. You're going to drive your vehicle, your motorcycle, your bicycle, your tractor trailer onto the ferry, and then you're going to have to go to exclusive ferry lanes and pay for your vehicle, yourself, and then also whoever is in the car with you. Depending on the ferry terminal you're departing from, you may actually be able to enjoy the local establishments and businesses around that ferry terminal. So if you're going to a specific ferry terminal, you might want to check and see if there is a local shop that sells some donuts or sandwiches that you can eat as a snack while on the ferry ride. Some of the more fancy ferry terminals that you're going to be using, let's say like Seattle, is actually going to have more fancier vending machines so that way you can have more fresh food while you are sailing on the ferry. So you've already got your food and snacks, or maybe you're just waiting in line to board the ferry. Let's break this down into two categories. Category 1 is going to be the walk-on passengers, and category 2 is going to be the drive-on passengers. Let's go and break down category 1 first with the walk-on passengers. When you are onboarding on the ferry as a walk-on passenger, you're literally going to be inside of the ferry terminal, probably sitting in a breezeway waiting for the ferry to onboard you. You do have to keep in mind that there are going to be exiting passengers from the previous ferry. So you're going to have to wait for the passengers to disembark, and then when all of those passengers disembark, then you're going to be allowed on the boat. That's going to be true for the drive-on ferry passengers as well. Now let's discuss those walk-on passengers with a ticket. So in regards to walk-on passengers, not every ferry route and schedule is going to require a passenger to have a ticket. So for instance, a passenger who is walking onto the ferry from Bremerton does not need to have a ticket to go and ferry over to Seattle. However, a passenger that's walking onto the ferry from Seattle going over to Bremerton will need to have a ferry ticket. So if you do have a ferry ticket and at your terminal, you're actually going to find some ferry ticket scanning machines. So you're actually going to have to keep your ferry ticket, which is essentially your boarding pass, and then you're going to be finding this scanning machine and scanning your ticket to board that ferry. So now you are about to board onto the ferry. You're going to wait in the terminal, walk across the breezeway, go across a small little metal bridge that literally connects the ferry terminal over to the ferry. And in this particular instance, depending on what you are having to do, you are either going to find your seats, maybe quickly use the restroom, or maybe if you're hungry, go to the galley or cafeteria and go ahead and grab a snack. Some pro tips about finding a seat on the ferry is pretty much first come, first serve. If you want a good seat, you definitely want to find your seat as fast as possible after boarding. If you really don't care where you're going to be sitting, then go ahead and just kind of choose one of the more individual seats versus a booth. And if you are going to be getting some food or maybe some drinks, then you're going to want to go to the cafeteria, enjoy your meal in the designated cafeteria area, and then find a regular seat. Now let's discuss and break down Category 2. Category 2 is going to be those drive-on passengers. Just like with the walk-on passengers, you are going to have to wait for the previous voyage passengers to drive off of the ferry. And once all of those passengers drive off, then eventually you're going to be expected to drive on. If you are a drive-on passenger, you won't actually have to scan a ticket. You're actually going to be paying someone at the ferry booth, and when you actually pay that person, that's essentially going to be your boarding pass, because the toll booth is going to open and then you're going to be able to drive in and wait in the ferry lines. Since driving, motorcycling, e-skateboarding, e-bikes and whatnot are a little bit more dangerous per se, you definitely want to make sure that you're taking your time to board this ferry with your vehicle or whatever it is that you're using. There are going to be ferry staff that are going to give you directions on where to go, where to park, what lane to be part of, and when you come to your stopping point inside of the ferry, make sure you turn off your vehicle and put your car in an emergency brake. There have been times where the ferries did battle more rougher waters and the vehicles inside would ping pong off of each other. So make sure you're going to be putting your emergency brake on, and you are going to ensure the best possible success for you and your vehicle, as well as your belongings, to be as safe as possible. So now let's talk about cancellations and delays. If you are in the pool of those people who are in the similar situation where the ferry is experiencing a very long delay or perhaps a cancellation, we need to understand that these ferries are conflicting with other external factors. Some of these external factors can be things such as inclement weather, maybe there's a pod of whales or marine life that's in the same trajectory of the ferry routes. And then there's the most unfortunate situation, which is the fact that the Washington State Ferry staff is just understaffed. So when one Washington State Ferry staff calls out because they're sick or whatever the reason, that's going to put strain on all of the other staff that are using and operating that particular ferry boat, and then that's effectively going to cause delays. Now, do keep in mind that this segment of this video is not here to throw shade at the Washington State Ferry staff. I see you all working your butts off all the time. You're out there directing people where to park, you're on the boats cleaning, making sure that none of the passengers are going crazy, and you're always there to answer our questions and service us with a smile. And so I do want to say thank you for all of that you do. So we've parked our car, or maybe we found our seat. We're on the ferry. Good job, you finally made it. Now, what's the etiquette? What's the behavior that you're expected to follow while you're on these Washington State Ferry vessels? The name of the game is essentially going to be respectful as possible. That's going to include being respectful as in cleaning up after yourself and or your family and or pets, and then also making sure that your media consumption, your TikToks and Netflix and music are going to be specific for you. So if you are going to be listening to music or watching Netflix or using TikTok or Instagram, have some earbuds in or headphones on, so that way all of that media consumption is exclusively for you. While you're on these ferries, you're going to have the potential to see some of the beauties of Washington State, places like the Seattle skyline, Mount Rainier, and if you're really lucky, you might be able to see a pod of whales or dolphins or other marine life while you are on the ferry boat. Another thing you want to consider while you're on these Washington State ferries is the fact that you know what vehicle you're using, meaning you know the make and model, the color, the year, the plate tags, because there are going to be situations when if you disembark your vehicle to go hang out inside of the actual ferry cabin, you are going to sometimes have your vehicle alarm system go off, and that's going to be resonating throughout the whole entire car deck. So if that happens, the ferry staff, the ferry captain are gonna come over the PA system and they're gonna say your 2022 Toyota Tundra is actually having the alarm active. And in that situation, you want to know what vehicle that you have so you can go turn off that alarm system. No one's going to enjoy a alarm system that is going off for a 30, sometimes 1 hour sailing voyage. Now let's talk about the etiquette and behavior of the drive-on passengers. If you are going to be getting out of your vehicle, all of the rules and etiquettes and behavior that the walk-on passengers are expected to abide by is now going to be something that you're going to be abiding by. If you're going to stay inside of your vehicle, make sure that your music on your car's volume is not overly loud. If you're again going to be watching Netflix or doing TikTok or whatever, you have to be as respectful as possible to the other passengers in the car deck. You may have a relatively quick 20 to 25, maybe 30-minute ferry voyage, or if you're going to be using a longer ferry route and or schedule, then you may be on that ferry for no less than an hour. The ferry staff doesn't want you to be bored. You can actually get out of your vehicle and walk around the ferry. As long as it doesn't say ferry staff, then it's pretty much a public area that you're allowed to go ahead and wander about, minus the gender-specific restrooms. While I'm on the ferry, I actually like to take naps, but also if I'm not tired or I don't need a nap at that point, I will typically pull out my handheld gaming device or maybe have a show or two downloaded onto my phone and then respectfully play my game or watch my Netflix or Hulu or whatever on my phone in my little corner of the ferry. So if you're watching this video and you've used the Washington State Ferries, or maybe just the ferry in general, what kind of entertainment have you used in order to pass the time on your sailing voyage? Let me know in the comments below. Another thing that you want to keep in mind about the ferries is that you are going to have entertainment. Be that entertainment on your phone or maybe your gaming device. And then also, depending on the ferry, there may be public tables where there is a public puzzle that people are putting together. And also in some rare situations, I've actually seen people playing some cards or mahjong to pass the time. After an X amount of time, you've been on the ferry, you are almost at your ferry arrival terminal, and you are now going to get ready to disembark the ferry. You're going to actually hear the captain or the Washington State Ferry staff come onto the PA system and say,
"Destination. Please make sure that you have all of your personal belongings before disembarking the vessel. Drivers and passengers, return to your vehicles. For safety and health reasons, do not start your engine until directed by a crew member. Walk-on passengers will disembark using the overhead walkway from the main passenger cabin. Cyclists should return to their bicycles at this time. All passengers must disembark the vessel upon arrival. Thank you for sailing aboard the Washington State Ferries. We look forward to seeing you again soon."
After that time, when the PA system announces that the ferry is going to be docking soon, again, make sure that you are cleaning up after yourself. That's actually a great time to go ahead and head back to your vehicle and prepare to disembark the vehicle once the ferry has officially docked. Once the ferry has officially docked, this concept of offboarding is pretty much going to be the opposite in the reverse of what you did to onboard. So walk-on passengers are going to walk off of the ferry and into the terminal, and then the drive-on passengers are going to drive off and then go drive to wherever they need to go. A few things that you want to consider whenever you are driving off of the ferry is make sure that you set an alarm if you are taking a nap in your vehicle, or making sure that you're ready to go to disembark, meaning that your car is started, you're about to shift into drive, and then at the directions of the ferry staff, you are then going to drive off of the ferry. Be sure to keep your vehicles off until otherwise noted by the ferry staff, because that's just a safety value that they have to consider. So making sure that your vehicle, your motorcycle is off until the staff tell you to turn it on. It's going to be almost like a domino effect where the first car in your lane or row is going to start off the vehicle, and then they're then going to see cars behind them start their vehicles. And then again, listen to the Washington State Ferry staff to officially offboard. Okay, so this is the part of the video where I'm going to selfishly ask you to like and subscribe this video. I created this video to help you navigate the Washington State Ferry system. It does take a little bit of practice, but after you get the hang of it, it actually becomes pretty monotonous and easy. So I'm hoping that you learned something from this video, and if you did, this is just a gentle reminder for you to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.